The morning sun rose over New Haven like it had for the past 23 years. Claire Bennett stood on her porch, watching the golden light spread across the wheat fields that stretched to the horizon. Her two children, Amy and Danny, were already awake and fighting over breakfast inside. She smiled at the sound. This was home. This was peace. New Haven sat on the planet Meridian 7, a world so similar to Earth that the first colonists cried when they stepped off their ships. 43,000 people now called this place home. They had schools, hospitals, farms, and even a small spaceport. Life was simple here. Life was good. Captain Greg Hamilton sat in the Colony Defense Center staring at his screen with growing concern. Reports had come in overnight about ship movements near their sector. The Vaxxer Empire was on the move again. Greg knew about the Vaxxer, everyone did. They were a reptilian species that believed they owned half the galaxy. They took what they wanted and destroyed anyone who stood in their way. Greg sent an urgent message to Earth's Colonial Protection Bureau. He explained the situation and requested military support. The reply came back 6 hours later. The bureaucrats told him not to worry. The Vaxxer had no reason to bother with a small farming colony. Greg wanted to believe them, but something felt wrong. Governor Linda Morrison was in her office when the Vaxxer ships appeared in orbit. There were 12 of them, massive warships that blotted out the sun as they passed overhead. Every screen in New Haven lit up with the same message. Commander Jothic of the Vaxxer 3rd Fleet demanded that all humans leave the planet within 6 hours. The planet now belonged to the Vaxxer Empire. Linda immediately opened a communication channel. She spoke calmly and respectfully. She offered to share the planet. She suggested they could negotiate boundaries. She proposed a joint colony where both species could live in peace. Commander Jothic listened to her entire speech in silence. Then he laughed. The Vaxxer commander told her that humans were weak, pathetic creatures who did not deserve the gift of space travel. He said that their very existence insulted the great Vaxxer Empire. 6 hours was more mercy than her kind deserved. Linda felt ice in her veins. This was not a negotiation. This was an execution notice. Greg Hamilton activated every alarm in the colony. People poured into the streets in confusion. Parents grabbed their children. The elderly moved as fast as they could. Greg directed everyone to the spaceport. They had 5 transport ships. Each could hold about 400 people. He did the math in his head and felt sick. They could save 2,000 people at most. Claire Bennett heard the alarms from her kitchen. She ran outside and saw the Vaxxer ships hanging in the sky like dark clouds. Her husband, Martin, was at their homestead 15 miles away checking on the cattle. She tried calling him, but the communication networks were jammed. She grabbed Amy and Danny and ran for their vehicle. The spaceport became a scene of chaos. Families pushed and shoved, desperate to get their children on the ships. Greg made the hardest decisions of his life. Children first, then parents with children, then anyone else who could fit. People begged him. They cried. They offered him money, possessions, anything. He could barely see through his own tears as he turned them away. Kyle Morrison, the governor's son, was conducting orbital surveys in his small research vessel when the Vaxxer arrived. He watched in horror as his mother tried to negotiate with the aliens. He wanted to fly down and get her, but she ordered him to stay in orbit. She told him to document everything, to be a witness. Kyle recorded every second, his hands shaking on the controls. Claire Bennett reached the spaceport with her children. She saw the massive crowd and knew immediately they would not all fit. A young soldier, barely 20 years old, was organizing the boarding. He took one look at Amy and Danny and waved them through. Claire tried to follow, but he stopped her. Children only for this ship, he said. The next ship would take parents. Claire kissed her children and told them to be brave. She promised she would see them soon. Amy, who was only 7, started crying. Danny, at 10 years old, tried to act tough, but his lip trembled. A kind woman on the ship took their hands and led them inside. Claire watched the loading door close. She told herself Martin would come soon. They would get on the next ship together. The 6 hours passed like 6 minutes. Commander Jothic waited exactly as long as he promised. Not 1 second more. The first transport ship was still loading when the Vaxxer opened fire. The orbital bombardment began at the spaceport. Energy beams, bright as lightning, struck the landing pads. The explosions threw people through the air like leaves in a storm. The transport ships tried to launch. 2 made it off the ground. 3 were destroyed before their engines could fire. Claire Bennett was standing on loading pad 7 when the beam struck. She did not feel any pain. There was only light and then nothing. Greg Hamilton was at the Defense Center when it took a direct hit. The building came down on top of him and everyone inside. They died doing their duty, trying to coordinate an evacuation that was always doomed to fail. Martin Bennett was loading hay when the sky turned red. He looked up and saw the fire falling from space. He tried to run to his truck, but the blast wave hit his homestead before he took 3 steps. He died thinking about Claire and his children, hoping they had escaped. Governor Linda Morrison stood in her office, watching her colony burn. She could have run. She could have tried to save herself. Instead, she broadcast one final message to Earth. She told them what happened. She told them the Vaxxer had given no real chance to escape. She told them that New Haven had been peaceful, defenseless, and innocent. Then the energy beam struck the government building, and her message ended in static. The Vaxxer fleet spent 4 hours systematically destroying every structure on Meridian 7. They targeted homes, schools, hospitals, and farms. When their sensors detected people hiding in bunkers, they used chemical weapons to flush them out. Commander Jathic wanted no survivors. He wanted no witnesses. He wanted only a message. Kyle Morrison watched it all from orbit. He recorded his mother's final transmission. He recorded the destruction of the spaceport. He recorded the firestorms that consumed the wheat fields where children had played yesterday. He recorded everything, tears streaming down his face because his mother had told him to be a witness. 2 transport ships made it out of the atmosphere. One was carrying 412 civilians, mostly children. The other carried 306 people, including elderly colonists and injured survivors. 1,818 people escaped. 41,182 people died. When the Vaxxer finished their work, they broadcast their victory across multiple frequencies. Commander Jathic appeared on screens across known space. He announced that the human colony of New Haven had been removed for trespassing on Vaxxor territory. This was a warning to all human colonies. Stay within your borders or face extinction. The 2 transport ships limped into Way Station Delta 3 days later. The refugees were traumatized, many injured. Children cried for parents who were never coming. Claire's daughter Amy kept asking when her mother would arrive. The station personnel did not know how to answer her. The transmission of what happened reached Earth within hours. The footage that Kyle Morrison recorded was played in every government building, every news station, every home. Humanity watched New Haven burn. They watched children die. They watched peaceful farmers vaporized in their fields. The Galactic community issued the expected statements. They condemned the violence. They called for restraint. They suggested diplomatic channels. They had seen this kind of tragedy before. Aggressive species often preyed on weaker colonies. Usually the victim species protested, imposed some sanctions, and eventually moved on. This was simply how the galaxy worked, but they did not know humanity. Not yet. Admiral Peter Hayes sat in the Emergency Council session on Earth. He was 62 years old, a veteran of humanity's first contact wars. He had always fought with honor, with restraint. He believed in rules and proportional response. He watched the footage of New Haven burning, and something inside him broke. Not his mind, but his faith. His faith that mercy mattered. His faith that restraint would be respected. The council debated for 18 hours. Some wanted economic sanctions. Some wanted a limited military strike. Some wanted to do nothing, fearing a wider war. President Karen Mitchell finally ended the debate. She looked at Admiral Hayes and spoke clearly. Admiral, you are authorized to respond with appropriate force to ensure this never happens again. Admiral Hayes understood what she was really saying. She was giving him permission to interpret those orders however he saw fit. He stood, saluted, and left the chamber without another word. In the weeks that followed, Admiral Hayes began mobilizing every ship, every weapon, every soldier humanity possessed. This was not going to be a proportional response. This was not going to be a measured retaliation. This was going to be a message that would echo across the galaxy for 1,000 years. The Vaxxor Empire had killed 41,000 humans. They were about to learn what happened when humanity stopped showing restraint. 6 weeks passed since New Haven burned. In that time, Admiral Peter Hayes had assembled something the galaxy had never seen before. 300 warships gathered at staging point Zulu 9, floating in the darkness like a school of metal predators. 5 massive dreadnought-class vessels formed the center of the fleet. The largest was the EDS Retribution, Admiral Hayes's flagship. Over 200,000 crew members staffed these ships. There were no celebrations, no ceremonies. The mood was cold and determined. Every single person in the fleet had watched the footage from New Haven. Many had lost friends or family there. They knew what they were being asked to do, and not one of them hesitated. Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker led the reconnaissance mission into Vaxxor space. His ship, the EDS Shadow, was built for stealth. It could slip past sensors like a ghost through walls. Steve and his small crew spent 2 weeks mapping Vaxxor territory, gathering intelligence and searching for targets. What they found was the Karax system. 3 planets orbited a yellow star, all 3 inhabited by Vaxxor citizens. Over 2 billion people lived in this system. Mining stations, manufacturing centers, and military academies filled the orbital space. Most importantly, the Vaxxor 3rd Fleet was stationed here. Commander Jathic himself lived on the 2nd planet, in a massive estate overlooking a crimson ocean. Steve Parker recorded everything and sent the data back to Admiral Hayes. The message was clear. This was the heart of Vaxxor military power in this region. This was where the murderers of New Haven celebrated their victory. This was the target. Earth sent one final diplomatic mission before the fleet moved. Ambassador Helen Brooks traveled to the Vaxxor homeworld with official demands. She requested the surrender of everyone responsible for the New Haven massacre. She demanded full reparations for the families of the dead. She asked for a treaty guaranteeing peace between their species. The Vaxxor High Command laughed at her. They sent her back to Earth with a recorded message. Commander Jathic appeared on screen, boasting about how easily humans died. He described in detail how the children screamed. He called humans weak and pathetic. He said they would wipe out 10 more colonies if humans did not retreat from all border systems. Admiral Hayes received this message while his fleet traveled through faster-than-light space. He gathered his senior officers in the bridge of the Retribution. Captain Jack Turner, his second-in-command, was a younger man who still believed in rules and proportional justice. He asked if they should try one more diplomatic approach. Maybe go through a neutral species. Maybe find some other way. Admiral Hayes said nothing. He simply played the Vaxxor message again. The officers listened to Commander Jathic laugh about dead children. When it ended, Hayes asked a simple question. If we let this stand, how many more colonies will burn? No one had an answer. Jack Turner nodded slowly. He understood. Dr. Paul Sanders was Earth's leading expert on quantum physics and stellar manipulation. He had spent 15 years developing a weapon system called Project Sundial. The concept was terrifying in its simplicity. By placing specialized arrays near a star and flooding it with specific quantum frequencies, they could destabilize the fusion processes at its core. They could make a star die. The weapon had never been tested at full scale. Computer simulations showed it would work, but there was a difference between theory and reality. Dr. Sanders briefed Admiral Hayes on the risks. The star might expand rapidly, consuming everything in the inner system, or it might collapse and explode in a supernova. Either way, everything in the Karax system would die. Admiral Hayes asked how long it would take. Dr. Sanders estimated 6 to 8 hours once the arrays were activated. Hayes nodded and gave the order to prepare Project Sundial for deployment. Dr. Sanders felt the weight of history on his shoulders. He was about to help kill billions. He kept telling himself they had started this. They had murdered innocents first. The Earth fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Karax system. Alarms immediately sounded on every Vaxxor ship and station. They saw the human fleet and scrambled their defenses. The Vaxxor 3rd Fleet was formidable, with over 150 warships. They had never lost a battle. They moved to intercept with absolute confidence. The space battle began with fury. Vaxxor ships opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams and missiles filled the space between the two fleets. Human ships returned fire, their weapons blazing in the darkness. Explosions bloomed like flowers made of fire. Ships on both sides took damage. Some exploded, some broke apart, some simply went dark and drifted away. In the first 3 hours of fighting, the human fleet lost 37 ships. Over 12,000 crew members died. The Vaxxor fought with skill and experience. They had been waging war for centuries. But Admiral Hayes was not trying to win a traditional battle. He was buying time. While the main fleet kept the Vaxor engaged, the EDS Retribution and 6 science vessels pushed through the combat zone. They headed straight for the system's star. Vaxor commanders noticed the movement but assumed it was a retreat. They focused on destroying the main human battle group, confident in their victory. Dr. Sanders and his team worked frantically in the Retribution's science bay. They prepared the sundial arrays, checking every connection and every calculation. Dr. Claire Bennett worked alongside them. She was the survivor from New Haven who had watched her children board the transport ship. Amy and Danny had made it to safety, but her husband Martin had died in the bombardment. Claire had volunteered for this mission. She wanted to be here when the weapon fired. The science ships deployed the arrays directly into the star's corona. The heat was incredible. Even with shields at maximum, 2 ships lost their shield generators and had to retreat. But the arrays were in position. They floated in the stellar fire, waiting for activation. The Vaxor finally realized what the humans were doing. Commander Jathik himself screamed orders over the communication channels. Every Vaxor ship broke off from the main battle and rushed toward the star. They had to stop the humans. They had to destroy those arrays. But the human fleet followed them, attacking from behind, sacrificing ships to slow the Vaxor advance. Admiral Hayes opened a channel on every frequency in the Karax system. His voice was calm and cold. He explained what the arrays would do. He told the Vaxor people that in 10 hours their star would begin to die. He gave them that much time to evacuate. He said it was more warning than New Haven received. More mercy than Commander Jathik showed to 41,000 humans. The Vaxor planets erupted into chaos. Some people believed the human admiral. Some thought it was a bluff. Millions rushed to spaceports and private ships. Traffic jams formed in orbital space as vessels fought to escape. Parents clutched children. The elderly were left behind. It was the same panic that New Haven experienced, but on a scale 1,000 times larger. Most Vaxor refused to believe humans would actually do this. They thought no species could be that ruthless. They stayed in their homes and waited for their military to protect them. Commander Jathik broadcast reassurances. The humans were bluffing. The Vaxor Empire was invincible. Everything would be fine. Dr. Claire Bennett stood at the activation console. Her finger hovered over the button. Steve Parker, watching from the EDS shadow at a safe distance, sent reports about the evacuation. Millions were still on the planets. Millions of children, elderly and innocent civilians. Admiral Hayes received the reports. He did not countermand the order. Claire thought about Martin. She thought about Amy asking when Mommy would come home. She thought about the 41,000 who never got a warning. She pressed the button. The sundial arrays activated with a pulse of quantum energy that made the star shudder. Over the next 6 hours, the fusion processes inside the star began to destabilize. Solar radiation spiked to lethal levels. The temperature increased by thousands of degrees. Massive solar flares erupted from the surface, lashing out at the inner planets. The Vaxor fleet made a desperate final attempt to destroy the arrays. Human ships threw themselves in the way, buying time with their lives. Captain Jack Turner rammed his cruiser into a Vaxor dreadnought to stop it from reaching the arrays. He and his entire crew died in the explosion, but the arrays remained intact. The evacuation became more desperate. Ships overloaded with passengers until their life support systems failed. Some vessels collided in their panic to escape. The human fleet stopped firing on Vaxor ships. Admiral Hayes ordered his forces to protect the evacuation routes instead. He would kill, but he would let those who fled survive. 31 hours after activation, the star Karax went supernova. The explosion was visible from systems hundreds of light-years away. The 3 inhabited planets were sterilized instantly, their atmospheres stripped away by the blast. The Vaxor Third Fleet was annihilated. Space stations melted like wax. Everything within the inner system simply ceased to exist. 1.8 billion Vaxor died. Some were military personnel who had blood on their hands. Most were civilians who had done nothing wrong. Children died. The elderly died. Artists, teachers, and farmers died. They died because their government had chosen genocide and humanity had responded in kind. The human fleet retreated to the edge of the blast wave.